Welcome, listeners, to www.ironradio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. Thanks for listening.
Good morning, everybody. You're on Iron Radio. This is Phil Stevens. I am a strength coach, powerlifter, Highland Games athlete. I am now a tackle football coach starting this week.
Yeah.
So, yeah, all the things.
Nice. This is Dr. Mike T. Nelson, creator of the Flex Diet certification and the Physiologic Flexibility certification, which opens again September 18th. And we just saw Metallica in the theater doing a live broadcast of their show from Arlington, Texas last night. And it was really awesome.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, it's been years, Mike, since I got any metal recommendations from you. I really
I'll have to send
I
you
need to
some
do
good
that.
ones.
Absolutely. Yeah, between you and Fortress, I mean, I felt like I had the finger on the pulse of things there for a while, but not lately. I'm like Bill, though. I tend to just like my standbys. I don't know.
Yeah. The new Metallica is actually really good. I like it a lot.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Okay. I am Lonnie Lowry. I'm a food industry and academic consultant. I'm a former competitive bodybuilder, podcaster, obviously.
Yep. OG podcaster.
OG.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. I have two little things this morning, and then I know Phil has something that we can discuss. Let's start with a mail here I got from listener. We'll just say Sean. He says, "Hi, Lonnie, Phil, and Mike. No doubt you are all familiar with Nassim Taleb and some of his books. I know Mike is. And just a sidebar, I had to look him up. I'm sort of out of the loop on some of this stuff, but apparently Ripito knows him, and he's the anti-fragile guy, amongst other things, but Mike can fill us in.
Yeah.
Taleb was a guest on the Odd Lots podcast, a financial show, on April 6, 2023. During the first 6 minutes of the show, he smears the good name of weight training as, quote, bad for the heart, close quote, according to the literature. I think this assertion deserves a thorough Iron Radio rebuttal. By the way, the podcast is free on iTunes. Have fun, gentlemen. Best to all, Sean." All right. Well, he mentioned you specifically, Mike. So how are you familiar with Nassim here? And
I first heard of him he had a book called The Black Swan, which the short version of it is we're very bad at predicting these huge events that kind of change things. Like humans just think everything's going to kind of linearly march on along, and almost nothing linearly does that. David West has a great book about that almost nobody's read, but that was like the basis of my PhD. You know, how do you look at, nonlinear variability across physiologic systems? But the short version is like these big events come and they change a bunch of stuff, so we should be looking for those big events. Nassim had a good book called Fooled by Randomness, like just how people are always wanting to find nice and neat patterns and not really looking for things that possibly have more random. And then I really like the book Anti-Fragile, which instead of just trying to be more robust, humans and physiologic systems actually get better with use. Right? So weight training is a perfect example. You train your right bicep, as we all know, and not only does it improve up to the point that it's where it was before you train, it actually gets a little bit better from the stress. So things that are anti-fragile can actually increase in different properties over time with the correct amount of stress, which is almost the inverse of every kind of non-living thing. They all tend to just degrade with use. So his books, I think, are great. I do recommend them. It is a very hard, almost obtuse writing style, and every time I finish one of his books, I'm like, man, I think you could have said that in 50 words, but I'm not sure I would have got the concept still.
yeah. How is it different from just like plasticity, like muscle plasticity or neuroplasticity, or is that kind of the point?
Yeah, it's similar to that. So he would argue that plasticity is just saying that something can actually change, and that most things change but don't actually rise above and are actually better than they were at baseline. They're just different. So the analogy he uses is that if something is fragile, if I drop, a glass bowl on the floor, it's going to break and shatter. If I have a Tupperware bowl, I can bounce it off the floor and it's more robust, where it's not going to break, but it doesn't really get any better from applying that stress. if I have like a physiologic system, I'm applying that little bit of stress, and not only does it not fall apart into 100 pieces, it actually gets to baseline and actually goes above baseline. So it's actually a little bit more and better prepared for that insult next time.
Yeah. I've often thought about the metaphor of a car engine. Sometimes we use it in like basic physiology classes, and I'll kind of make that point, I guess, that, this is something that unless you swap in a new part, it's just like laws of thermodynamics. It's going to head toward chaos. It's, it's going to break down.
Yeah.
And the human body is always in this state of flux, which is just a whole different thing with ins and outs, and building new structures. And
the battle of entropy.
Right. Yeah, we're all agents of entropy, actually.
Yeah.
Phil, what do you think about the weight training stuff? I saw a couple of comments online when I just looked this up about people are like, yeah, but that depends on the program, because it basically be saying it stiffens your arteries, or if it causes cardiovascular stress or even damage, or weight training. I saw some stuff about, I'm not even any bigger. I tried weight training for 6 months and here's what happened. One of those kinds of things. And it's like, yeah, what kind of program are you on, though?
Yeah.
If you're just going in there doing your 3 sets of 10 every day, sort of like what Mike said, you'll come up to a certain adaptation, but why would you expect more if you're not asking more in a progressive way? What do you think about any of that stuff with the weights?
Well, I think it's true and not true. It depends on how far you push the weights. It's just like the stress you were talking about before. Like our bodies adjust to certain amounts of stress and get better. With too much stress, they break. Like with some weight training, it can be very beneficial to your cardiovascular health. I think they've done a good job of proving that here recently, whereas it sticks with cardio. It's right up there with cardio as far as that. Until, like, if you start pushing yourself to where you're a 280-pound jack dude that's fairly lean, you're still 280 pounds, and that's a lot for your heart to handle, arguably more so than if you were 280 pounds and mostly fat, because now you have all that muscle tissue has much more cardiovascular demand than 50 more pounds of fat would. So, yeah, there's give and take to it. There's some truth to it, but I think in general, if you're just putting a general spin on things, like for Gen Pop people, the average person that goes to 24-hour fitness and puts in half an hour, you're going to have a hard time convincing me that's bad for their heart. I want people to be active, and any kind of activity, especially the lades. Like, those people aren't doing what I would call training. Like, I'm serious. Up. And they're showing up, and literally most of their so-called strength training could probably be classified as cardiovascular activity, because the stresses they're applying aren't what we would call strength training stresses. They're going through the motions, tapping these machines, doing sets of 20 and moving on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Physical activity, kind of that generic kind of physical activity.
Yeah, they're doing GPP inside of an air-conditioned building. So, and then you get into it, and this is one study I'd love people to do. It's like blood pressure and things at the bottom of a squat. And I would love to be able to measure it momentarily. And then over time, one would expect just like we were talking about with the stressors before with this book. Let's say we consistently put you under a load that stresses your blood pressure. Over time, one would expect your body to adjust to that and lower your overall blood pressure to handle that spike, those consistent spikes that you're getting. I would, I have no evidence of this, but one would expect that, and I've never seen a study focused on that. But I think if that's an all-encompassing statement, I don't like it. If it's a possibility, I'm not going to lie. Sure.
Elite in anything. In any sport, don't pretend that that's for general health. It's not.
No, and it goes back to the old thing we've talked about a lot of times. We were listening to something last night. I don't remember who it was, but it was Lane Norton was arguing this guy. So basically, he stated that any female that has a six-pack is unhealthy. And then he started naming off, some guy. And Lane's like, well, that's essentially not true. Women can have a six-pack, but the guy was like, I guarantee you, and he was offering to pay for these ladies' blood test and come on his show. And he's like, if you're a lean woman with a six-pack, I'll pay for your blood test and I'll show you you're unhealthy. And like anything else that has context. If you're a frickin' Olympic sprinter, like their number one worry is not health. And that's okay. Their number one worry is to be a performance machine. Yes. Mm-hmm. And I think most professional athletes accept that. They know that, like the NFL players know that they're not doing this for the health. They're doing it for 10% for the love of the game and 90% for the $50 million a year they're going to make. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just true. And the fame and the fortune, of being a professional athlete. And they're willing, at some point in their life, they had that conversation with themselves.
Yeah.
I'm willing to do this, to do that. And is it going to take 5-10 years off my life? Yeah, probably so. But my great grandkids will still be, as long as I'm not stupid with my money, they'll be set for life.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. Even a lot of super motivated amateur athletes that don't make money, you can have very high level goals. The strength and muscle sports have been like this.
Yeah.
Nobody got set for life. Well, not many.
No.
The money's just not there. And yet they will really run themselves into the ground. I mean, we saw that it peaked in the 90s. And after the 90s, right, a lot of these guys, they're just train wrecks now. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of drug abuse, but it's also the brutal training loads, grabbing 200-pound dumbbells and throwing around and all the kinds of stuff. And that's not even the best example. There's many examples, I'm sure. Their spines are shot, their joints are shot. And even on that much juice,
look
that
at
many
us,
antibiotics,
Look at us right here. Like, you competed, I competed. Arguably, we can say not at that professional level. But look at the surgery we've had from our endeavors. I've got every limb that has been fixed. You've had elbows and triceps and, but it was worth it. We were willing to take that risk on. It was part of the enjoyment of it. But,
well, even, I don't want to get into it. Yeah, right. Multiple systems. I'm now paying for it.
Exactly.
No sense of going on with that. But yeah.
There is some data on you mentioned the squat, because I'm working on the Triphasic 2 book with Cal Dietz, and he has a Supramax program where you go into an isometric position or you do a slow eccentric with, 120% sometimes of your load. And it's a specific exercise. It's in a squat rack, so it's in a safe position. But it's heavy, and you're, holding that for several seconds. And so I was trying to pull up to see if there's any research on it. And there isn't, as far as I could find on that procedure, but there is stuff on blood pressure spikes, which do get really, really high. But in most of those studies, and again, it's a little messy because there's sometimes different populations, disease population, etc. It generally improves. But the caveat there, like you said, is the studies are relatively short. A lot of times they're untrained people. They have a disease. So that stressor is probably more than what they would get otherwise. And Cal's documented, like, pulse velocity stuff has gone up. Like, heart rates will drop dramatically. He's even looked at, anecdotally, blood pressure on his lifters. Most of the time their blood pressure chronically went down. Mm-hmm. And then if you look at the literature on what they call eccentric versus concentric hypertrophy for the cardiac system, for the heart, you can get into a situation where if you're only weight training and you're a large mammal and you're doing it for many, many years, that the heart has to adapt to that pressure just like any other system, but it can't necessarily grow outward because of the pericardial sac is more scar tissue. So the ventriculars add more muscle, the lower part of the heart, but it has to go inward. And what happens then is your chamber size gets smaller. Yeah. Because you have what's called LV, hypertrophy. The chamber is getting thicker, and then it takes away the amount of blood flow that you can move through the heart at that point. However, if you go to the other extreme and you look at extremely high-end cyclists who are not necessarily working against gravity, who are doing a ton of training, they can have almost the opposite problem, where the heart wall can become a little bit too thin because they don't have that high amount of afterload. They don't have that high amount of pressure. So again, you're if you go to either end of the spectrum, you can find, case studies and case reports. With the lifters, it's still debatable how much of that is a genetic issue. We used to have something called HOCM, which I think they changed it now to just obstructive cardiac myopathies. But yeah, any extreme at any end for a long period of time is going to come with a higher cost. But like you said, to the average person,
yes,
yeah, don't worry about it.
I mean, it's kind of like me saying, like, I could put out a book saying water's deadly because if you drink too much, it can kill you.
Yeah, hypomagnesemia.
So, I mean, everything in too big of a dose is not good. So
yeah,
that's what we have to look at.
No, it's a good point. When I was in grad school, I actually, like EKG class or whatever, we're running stuff. I was looking for LVH. I'm like, I wonder if I have that spike in the QRS complex. Do I train heavy enough? Am I big enough to have LVH? Mildly, but it wasn't what I would have thought. Because here's me thinking, man, I'm like 230 at 5'9". I don't know what that is, body mass index. That's pretty high. I'm always squatting heavy and everything, but I didn't really have that much LVH. I think maybe that's worse with guys who use a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
that's just definitely not helping that area because you have almost
thickening.
Yeah, indiscriminate growth of tissue, intestines, cardiac, everything.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So interesting stuff. I did want to bring up one thing though, that even that hand grip training, and we're talking about blood pressure as an example. I remember Marty Gabala. I was introduced to it first through him. I don't know, some of the guys at Guelph up in Canada or so whatever. They're just doing you squeeze the like 30% squeeze on a hand grip dynamometer kind of thing, and you hold it for 2 minutes. You do like 4 little sets of that, and your blood pressure comes down over time. It's meant to reduce blood pressure. And I can't help but think, as somebody who goes to the gym, well, I'm kind of doing that during sets. I'm squeezing the barbell for a minute or so, and you're probably getting some similar effect there. So, yeah, I got to think blood pressure would benefit overall. Despite, I've seen loads on leg presses. In the bottom of leg press, scary high blood pressures. You're like, whoa. But, yeah, I don't know. People like that. We were talking just the other week about people just trying to get a rise, and I think people like to be contrarian so they can get a rise out of people.
Yeah, and I thought, I haven't followed any of his stuff other than his books, but I thought he was like a huge fan of the deadlift, and the only time I ever met him was like 6 years ago, and he was like big into deadlifting and weight training, so I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know much about him. I'm just going off Sean's email here, so.
Yeah. It was very hard to have an in-person conversation with, though. I will say that.
Okay. I've got one other little piece here. I don't even know how relevant this is. I just happen to be looking at this. This connects to our sports, I think, because of the appetite aspect, and also to some of the stuff you played with, Mike, over the years with the cold. This is just from Science Daily. It says how cold temperatures trigger the brain to boost appetite. So whenever I see something that affects appetite, you get my attention, because that's always a challenge on the sports nutrition side. How to get people to gain weight when they're not hungry. This is August of this year, brand new. It says neuroscientists at Scripps Research have identified brain circuits that make mammals want to eat more when they're exposed to cold temperatures. Mammals automatically burn more energy to maintain normal body temp when exposed to cold. This cold-activated increase in energy expenditure triggers a concomitant increase in appetite and feeding, although the specific mechanism is unknown, blah, blah, blah. So they actually used mice. They identified this collection of neurons that are responsible for this, and they're trying to tease apart what part of these neurons are more connected to the energy expenditure side versus the appetite side, right? Because if you could do that and create drugs or some type of neurostimulation, you could turn on just appetite or just like fat burning energy expenditure kind of thing. I did play with the idea when I was competing. I knew that my metabolic rate was down after months of under eating, and I thought maybe I should just go play around in a cold swimming pool, and just to try to force my metabolism back up and all that kind of stuff. But it did make me think about how we might weird ways we might augment fat burning or increase appetite or whatever. This is just a mouse study, so it's not really worth getting into much except asking you guys. So, Mike, I know that you did some stuff with cold water immersion, right?
Yeah, so I have it as part of the physiologic flexibility certification, and I have a converted freezer in my garage. This is year 3 now, where filled it full of water. Right now, I did it yesterday. It's like 43 degrees up to your chin. And when I first started it, my my thought was, okay, maybe this is a good way for fat loss, because from physics it makes sense, right? Water is going to conduct more heat away. As you talked about, Lonnie, humans are homeotherms. You have to produce more heat. You produce more heat, that's going to require more energy. I was like, oh, maybe this is a cool way to, augment some fat burning. And the short version is, probably not. Does it happen? Yes. What I found, and so I went through and found and read, God, probably every piece of literature that's been published on it, I think. I went all the way back to some of the old Army studies from like the 1950s, and there's some stuff from the 1930s. And I talked to some other people too, and the short version is, if you do it to the point where you're literally shivering and horrible, which I've done, which I would not recommend, maybe. Outside of that, probably not. You just don't have a big enough stimulus there. So I was kind of disappointed by that. But there is some data if you're constantly in a cooler environment, possibly with sleep, possibly with just your normal temperature. But again, you have to be at the point where you're kind of uncomfortable. You can't compensate with technology and put more clothes on. The other part I noticed too, I don't know if you noticed this with yours, Lonnie, is that if you're really cutting calories or your stress is high, the cold water feels way worse than it does otherwise. Like the second you get in, you're just like, oh man, this just feels so much worse. But I still like it. I think there's some other benefits. You do get a huge dump of norepinephrine, dopamine, that kind of stuff. So you do feel a little bit more alert. So I think there are some benefits to it. Last part is, at least for me, like even when I played around with it, I haven't noticed a huge uptake in my appetite. But again, N of 1. I do know that if I start lifting more and the duration of sessions are more, like that will definitely spike my appetite. But I haven't noticed that with the cold yet.
Yeah, I remember from old, I think it's the Guyton exercise physiology book. They give examples of, if you're not familiar, there's a whole field of environmental physiology.
Yeah.
What happens when you stick people in water? Like Mike said, there's a convection and a conduction that's way harsher in cold water than it is in air.
Oh, yeah.
An old friend of mine, Ellen Glickman at Kent State, she does a lot of that work. And she was actually funded by the military to feed different thermogenic substances. Like she was testing capsaicin, sticking people in the underwater weighing tank when it was also filled with ice. Like the water was terrible. Oh man, I got stories about that. Like I would not participate in that stuff. Rectal probe up your backside. Yep. People are vomiting across the surface of the water because they can't hold down the capsaicin. I'm like, you can't pay me enough. She's like, you and your buddies you have different insulated properties because you're heavily muscled. I want you guys in there. I'm like, no. Just no. But yeah, I did remember reading stuff what you said, Mike. Like there is that sort of epidemiological stuff, like people who they have manual labor jobs, they're working the Alaskan pipeline or something, and they don't overclothe. They have fast metabolisms in that. It intrigued me too. But I haven't heard about this since then. I had a similar conclusion that you did, Mike, and I did not plunge myself into the cold water much because, when you're single digit body fat, low single digit, you're right. Yeah. It just hurts. You don't want to do that. It is an intriguing idea to force your metabolism up. Like you said, dump some, catecholamines and stuff, getting in water. I also heard though that if you shiver a lot, the glycogen stores get tapped, and I was afraid of in my glycogen stores and all that. So
if you don't shiver, it is shifting you more to use fat as fuel. Once you start shivering, that's actually a high output muscle thing to do, and you do use glycogen for that. Again, purists would argue you're still burning more calories. And again, anyone who's ever done that, again, I don't recommend it because you can have an after drop. You can have some bad stuff that happens to you, not necessarily frank hypothermia, but you feel pretty miserable for several hours after.
Yeah, and I didn't want to catch a cold. I mean, I'm running around. I live in freaking Ohio, and these diets. Yeah, the bodybuilding circuit was usually like late spring, so you're dieting real hard in the early months of the year, and I'm just like, no, it's too inconvenient. I can't. It's one of those things, like you said. It's logical, probably not physiological enough to have a clinical benefit. I don't know. I like you said though, N of one. I never really did anything but read about.
My question is and could any of this just be genetic, as far as something we've adapted to over generations of life? Because if you look at it, like, I can tell you just from experience, like, I am much less hungry when it's hot.
Mm-hmm.
The minute it cools down, it's like, oh, okay, I need to eat. I'm hungry. And could that be just from years of like if you look back in time before we had houses, when we lived in dirt mounds and tents, like, the weather starts cooling down. What do we need to do? It's going to get colder. We need to eat to survive the big cold coming on.
Yeah.
I mean, look at animals. Animals still do this.
Bears.
Like, bears pack on hundreds of pounds because it's getting cooler, and that's like their body knows that. Okay, temperature's dropping, time to eat. And could that be just in our code?
Here's a quote. It says one of their first observations was that the onset of cold temperatures going from 73 Fahrenheit to 39 Fahrenheit, mice increased their food seeking only after a delay of about 6 hours, suggesting that this behavior change is not simply a direct result of the cold sensing. So in other words, there was some lag. But I think they're kind of agreeing that I think the point of this study, and not that most of our listeners care, but they're identifying the specific region of the brain, probably monetarily motivated like everything else. Mm-hmm. How do we stimulate appetite in people who need it versus induce some thermogenesis,
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, like I said, the weird thing for me is I train better in the heat. Like, I love the summer for training because my joints just feel better. And my gym isn't air conditioned, so it'll be 97 degrees or whatever. It's like, I feel good. I don't need as much of a warm-up. My joints feel good. But I always competed in late winter because I was always eating up for meats. And I could not do that. Like, it's fucking August 3rd. It's 106 here today. I don't want to put in 10,000 calories. I have I sweat anyways when it's cold when I eat like that. So it was just miserable. So I always planned it was like November, December. Then I got 3 months of cooler weather, and I know I can eat. Right. So
yeah, agreed. I mean, look at the culinary side of this. I mean, in the fall you get pie and stew and all this heavy, I think about like Guinness meat pies and all this stuff. And during the summer, I'm not thinking about heavy, high-calorie foods. People are eating salads.
Yes, exactly. That's what I was going to say. Summer rolls around, and I want a light beer and a salad, not a Guinness and a steak.
Right. So it does make sense. It's just neat that I guess they're zeroing in on, at least in mice. We'll see where this goes in people. Anyway.
More stuff on that. There's something called the metabolic winter hypothesis from Ray Cronise. And their argument is that humans historically did kind of stock up a little bit more in fall, but that was to be ready for a protracted period where calories basically got a lot lower. And then now we never have that seasonality because of technology. Therefore, as a population, we just generally gain weight. We don't ever have that period of time where we're actually trying to get back down to our baseline because of resources. We have all the resources now, and over time that causes metabolic issues, which I probably would agree with.
So you're saying that's a sociological theory or biological?
They're trying to argue both, that our biology is kind of wired to prepare us for that.
Okay.
And now we kind of go into winter and we get all prepared, but because of technology, we're not really in a caloric deficit towards the end, right?
Mm-hmm. There's no feast or famine kind of.
Right. There's no famine real portion to that.
Well, which makes sense. I mean, in the real world, before modern technology, you'd have the feast when harvest came, and then everything's gone.
Yeah.
So, you're having this feast before a forced famine. So
right. Yeah. A lot of those, Samhain, is that how you pronounce it? Like the old Halloween origins and stuff, and a lot of those Norse things. Yeah, I feel like they're all about that. Like, let's just power down. Let's pack away as much muscle and fat as we can, because by come end of February, we're screwed.
Yeah.
We're all ready to step on stage because we're lean.
That's right.
But
all right. Well, let's go to break, and then when we come back, I know Phil has some cool stuff to talk about. Hey, everybody. Iron Radio is back, and in an expanded way. What can you expect? Well, first, you can get it simulcast every week on the nutritionradio.org network, as well as on the original podcast. It'll appear regularly on iTunes, Spotify, and all your favorite podcasting sites. We have a new Iron Radio / Nutrition Radio Facebook page as well. Please check us out. We're even backed up on YouTube. Second, please tell your friends who are longtime loyal listeners that they may see emails that share just the episode link and the show notes. This is a new thing, and we hope it will build community. Third, if you were a supporting member in the past, we may prompt you to resume through PayPal, but we will confirm each and every donor before reinstating that membership category. We'll never just restart your $4 auto payments without agreement from you. And of course, we will accept new members moving forward as well. Starting back slowly and honorably is the goal. And lastly, expect the sister show Nutrition Radio to expand into once weekly 45 to 60-minute episodes with guest co-hosts covering the same nerdy nutrition news that's been broadcast for a few months now in daily 10-minute clips. We hope that an expanded presence will get you the news, education, banter, and guests that's made Iron Radio's community so loyal from the start. You are appreciated.
Okay, guys, we're back. And what I want to hit on today is I was scrolling the social medias and something popped up, and there's a question we're always asked. But to start it off, the basic question would be, what advice would you give somebody starting off in this field? And Bobby Strope, which is he's an athletic trainer. He trains a strength coach that trains Patrick Mahomes, a bunch of other pro athletes. You know, he had a post, and it was like, that's the most often question he gets is, how do I not start in this field, but how do I start in this field and work with pros? And his answer was, it's the wrong question, and it's the wrong target. He said, you don't have that goal, and he never had that goal. He said, your goal should be make 1,000 middle school B-teamers into A-teamers, make 1,000 high school bench players into starters. By doing that, you'll eventually get pros. And that's the problem we see in all fields. I mean, but is like any field I've stepped into, of course, everybody has high aspirations. Like in art school, everybody wanted to be the next Picasso. Mm-hmm. In strength and conditioning, they all want to train pros. But they're putting the cart before the horse in numerous ways. I mean, not just their knowledge and ability, but simple things like your credibility and, things like that. So, I mean, you're not going to get a pro like John Smith is not going to graduate from, Butler University with a 4-year degree and then automatically train Michael Jordan. Mm-hmm. It just doesn't work that way. And I've told this to 1,000 people, but it's like your number one goal shouldn't be that, is what I would tell people. Like, your number one goal is just make the people better you can get. Like, if you concentrate 100% on making clients better, it's like every business I have, my marketing budget is the work I do. That's it. And then word of mouth. It's always worked the best. Like word of mouth advertising to me. And if you have that outlook, then 100% of your goal should be based on what you do, what you create. If you just concentrate on that, if you just concentrate on making every single person that walks through your door the best you can, that other shit's going to happen. Because you're going to get better too. But I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts on advice for people starting off in this field and just that statement in general?
I think it's great. And it's always fascinating to me how, from a movement standpoint, you could argue that getting a general population client who's never squatted before to do a nice squat, probably harder than an elite athlete.
Yeah.
But with elite athletes, you have all these other factors, going on, and very tiny things make a huge difference. So you've got that other end of the spectrum too. So yeah, I would agree. I mean, just keep getting better at what you're doing, because even if you got the opportunity to work with a high level athlete and you can't deliver, that's not going to end well.
No,
right?
yeah.
That's going to be really bad.
That's going to be the opposite of that word of mouth advertising.
Right.
You're going to head that way real fast.
Yep. Yeah, and obviously, I did a podcast with Dr. Andy Galpin on my show, the Flex Diet Podcast. People can look up, where we talked all about like the pros and the cons of training, elite level athletes and also high profile athletes, because those are not necessarily the same thing all the time. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into that most people probably haven't thought of either. But I think it looks good on social media to say, hey, I train this person, or hey, I train that person. The question I always ask people coming up then is like, okay, so let's say you get to the point where you have the skill set to do it. Let's say you can do a good job. But what if, top level athlete comes in and says, hey, I want you to train me, but you can't tell anyone about it because I don't want them to know I'm training with you.
Yep.
Would you still do it? And I think that will determine, are they trying to do it for the sake of doing it, or are they trying to do it because they want to say they trained LeBron or Michael Jordan or whatever?
Well, the thing is from my personal experience, what you're stating happens a lot.
It happens all the time.
Because I mean, I trained numerous players from a professional basketball organization, and one of the first things I had to do was sign a contract that said just that you do not say anything. And so, I mean, it's just like you're not allowed to say who you're helping, and that's just the way it goes. And it's not this social media blast. And I would argue that, I mean, there's a reason we've talked about it on this show 100 times. Like, I'd say a very large percentage of the best strength and conditioning coaches in the world, no one knows who the hell they are.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Because they're too busy doing their job, and not posting on social media.
Yeah,
like the whole world knows who frickin' Jillian Anderson is. She's not training professional athletes, And I could go out here today. I am in what people would call Chiefs Kingdom, and if I walked around in this town, I guarantee you probably 95 out of 100 people would not know who Bobby Strope is.
Yeah,
they don't give a shit, and he doesn't care.
Yeah.
He doesn't need to be known. His advertisement is going to the right people and to the right by Patrick's, field play, and him telling, hey, you need to go see Bobby. That's the right people are hearing it. And that's what you need to concentrate on. All these people coming out, I would tell people you need some social media presence, whatever. That should be low on your goals. Your number one goal should be perfecting your craft and creating results. If you concentrate on that, the rest of the shit's going to happen. It will happen.
How novel. Right. Actually be good. That was something became a mantra of mine my last couple of years of full-time teaching. I'm like, okay, stop for a minute. Don't you actually want to be good? Right? Yeah. Like, forget self-promotion, forget the letter grade in the class. Do you want to be good? Like, really good at what you do? Like, really delve into its secrets and advance the field in some way? Because you should. One thing that supports what you're saying about the word of mouth is one of the rules of thumb in writing letters of recommendation, which I did for lots of people to go on to, med school or wherever they're going, was that good reviews, good letters of recommendation are expected. A bad one will really hurt you. Yeah. And it's sort of like what you're saying. If a very famous person's like, I don't know, he just kind of wasted my time. I didn't feel like I got anything out of it. That's got to hurt a lot, as opposed to you expect high return when people that you work with, because you are delving into the secrets of your craft. I think it's a Beethoven quote. But when you do that kind of stuff, they're going to really heavily endorse you. And that's got to be way higher return than other forms of advertising, whether it's social media or mailings or whatever people try to do and they hope for a few % return. No, this would probably be a huge % return because people are like, well, it's rubber hits the road sort of evidence, right? That, hey, his methods work. I want to be like that guy. I mean, genetics and everything else aside. The other thing I want to say about this is that the professional athlete thing, and we were laughing about this, everybody, before we hit the record button, but freshmen and even college students right up to, I don't know, by the time they're seniors, they're starting to get disabused of this, but I want to be a physical therapist or an athletic trainer or a physical whatever, exercise physiologist and work with pro athletes or sports nutritionist. It's like, what? Like, with all due respect, I don't know if this is like a entitlement generation or what. Here's the curmudgeon button, firmly blinking here, curmudgeon button. But why? You've paid your dues. You got to pay your dues becoming good for, I don't know, 5 or 10 years at least, I would think, before, you should be pursuing that level of athlete. Like, why do you think you're just going to, I'm just going to get my degree and magically be hired by one of these pro, teams to be their sports nutritionist? It's like and even then, do you really think these guys are going to listen to you? I mean, some sports are worse than others, but basketball, in my experience, is the worst of all. You gave some basketball examples. They're barely going to listen to someone who's a powerhouse in their field, let alone, 19-year-old kids. So, yeah, I agree very much with that. Like, your expectations, you need to recalibrate. Go work with some high school and college students for a while and actually get good. Then, hopefully, you fall into the right network where you can reach out to some pros, I guess.
Yeah, well, yeah, and then there's another case of the experience you gain. Because I can tell you, I've had the privilege of working at a large organization that specializes on high-end athletes. And what I noticed in those organizations was really most of the time they weren't doing a lot of like groundbreaking shit.
Yeah.
Like this professional organization's whole deal was they get D1 athletes that are like first-round picks. That's what they concentrated on. That's who they get. And the work they have to, like, you're talking kids that are already first-round picks. They don't have to do much. Like, their job was literally don't hurt them. And to, like, do little drills that showcase them to maybe boost them up a little bit. And then you go to some other place that, like, literally this guy's job is take a kid that's not going to be drafted and get him drafted. Big fucking difference. The amount of work they're doing. And, I mean, that's where you need to start. Like he says, start with that kid that's on the bench and make him a starter. Once you get hundreds of those under your belt and you've got some knowledge, man. It's not hard with most of these professional athletes you're at nitpicking stages then. They're already freaks. Your goal is usually at that point, like I can almost guarantee you, I've never walked into Bobby's organization and watched him train, but I can guarantee you at like Patrick Mahomes' level, like his number one job isn't making him better. It's making him sustain a season and just working on injury things and things like that. They're like, he's already a fucking freak. He's just trying to keep him on the field. Now you take somebody else and make him into that. That's different. And that's where he started. Basically, he started with Patrick at 12 and helped turn him into that. And now his job is just maintain it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, what's your role? My thought was the strength coach or the sports nutritionist, you're not making this athlete's skill set better. That's up to him and the head coach or whatever drills that they do. All you are is you're like this just foundation. Is he underfed? Like for me, is he glycogen depleted? Is he under recovered? Whatever it is I can do with food, it's almost like Maslow's hierarchy. Just get the basics, the food and shelter stuff down. But a lot of the performance stuff at that level, because you're right. Everybody knows teams that recruit well do well. Yeah, and so the genetics are a huge part of that. Yeah, and like you're saying, keeping them healthy throughout the season, because anything they develop skill-wise or whatever, that's more on them. That's not on the strength coach necessarily, or for God's sake, the sports nutritionist. Those are more supportive roles, I would think. Yep.
Yeah, and also looking to see what caliber of athletes, like you guys said, you start with and where are the results. So a buddy of mine, Chris Corfus, who I know through RPR, he's a high school history teacher in Illinois, but he's taken numerous athletes who they don't recruit athletes. They don't get the top of the top, and they've finished extremely high year in and year out. So I'm like, what the heck is he doing? He's taking these people who are, not necessarily gifted freaks, but they're doing really well. to me, that's more interesting than an academy or someplace that takes, gifted freaks for 6 weeks and they do a little bit better on the combine. Okay. Yeah, there's some skill to that. I agree. But to me, that's different worlds. And the last part, too, is that I think there's some assumption that when you work with high-level athletes, that they're just robots and will do everything you tell them. And some will, but most of them, not really. Like, you still have to sell them on what you're doing. And, I found with certain, I wouldn't say what sport, but I can tell them my qualifications, I can tell them all the research studies, doesn't mean dick. But I can tell them that, hey, I worked with some special forces people. They did this. I think it'd be helpful for you. They're like, oh, your special forces people did this? Like, I'm totally doing this now. I'm like, great. They did the thing. I'm happy,
Yep.
It's like, they didn't care what I thought, but, I tell them that someone else they look up to did it. They're like, oh, I'm on board now. I got it.
Yep. And that's, I mean, that's just like my current role now. If I am turning a large group of 7 and 8 year olds into a fucking football team is a lot harder than taking some, I don't know, Division I linebacker and helping him get ready for the combine. Like, oh crap, what I'm doing. It's like herding cats. And, I have a huge respect for what most people would call lower level strength coaches and coaches.
Oh, yeah.
Like, the jobs they are doing are so much all encompassing. They're not worried about, like, at the professional level, you're looking at minutia most of the time.
Yeah.
At that low level, it's like everything sucks. Like, this person just sucks. We have to fix everything.
He's running the wrong direction.
I've got 18 kids that are weak, out of shape, and know nothing about football, and I have to turn them into a team.
It's almost like parenting, teaching values and teamwork and all that kind of stuff,
But you get you need that. As a beginning strength coach, you need that total immersion in everything sucks.
Oh, yeah.
Have a laser focus on fixing something small. You need to be able to turn flour, eggs, salt into bread. Not.
That's good.
I mean, you do. You need to take all those ingredients and turn them, not just take a baked piece of bread and put butter on it and call it a masterpiece.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you're doing at the high level. The thing's already cooked for you. So.
Yeah,
that gives me flashbacks to, I worked with a women's high school soccer team for a while. And I remember, at the time going in thinking, okay, this is going to be a fair amount of work, but, this will be good. And all the athletes are great. They were like, I actually prefer working with female athletes most of the time anyway. But I just had them do a basic assessment. I'm like, okay, have them all line up. There's like 20 of them. Okay, I just want you to squat, do this. Half of them, when they squatted, I think their knees touched each other. This is like day one. I'm thinking, oh my God, what did I sign myself up for?
Yep. But I mean, it gives you this huge breadth of knowledge. Like, you need that. You need to be able to look at things like that. And you don't get that stuff through school. You don't get that in your 4-year degree. You need years in the field to be able to just pick out that stuff. And there's no fast tracking it. I mean, that's the same thing. Like, I always go back to art school, but everybody wanted to be Picasso, but they didn't want to learn how to draw first. Like, you got to learn the basics in every field of life. Like, there's stones that you need to walk on. There's a path that has been built in strength and conditioning.
There's no doubt. Dude, I have seen undergrad strength conditioning programs where they get actually woefully inadequate exposure to actual athletes.
Mm-hmm.
They're learning a lot of exercise science and physiology and stuff like that. And I would always tell those guys, I'm like, listen, my background, because I taught undergrad strength conditioning class a couple of times. I'm like, my background is bodybuilding. I didn't have to perform in anything. I can't look at someone, and I would use people like you, Phil, as an example, because I'd have you come speak, speak to the class about, hey, cues, looking at someone, identifying these things, and not just doing that, but knowing the right correction, or even as important, like what you're saying with making bread, is what about like the motivational aspects? How do you get them to comply? You're working with real human beings, sometimes very immature and not compliant. Yeah, and until I was a university sports nutritionist, I remember the strength coach, his name was Tim, I'll just leave it at that. He's like, Lonnie, this was early on, he said, don't waste your time. Until that guy proves to you that he wants this as much as you do, don't even waste your breath on him. Because you're going to give him this advice with really solid evidence behind it and everything else, and he'll be better if he follows it, but he won't. He's just, he's pulling your chain. Because he's too immature. He's not going to comply with that. So I'm like, oh, okay, good to know. Like, don't overinvest until they show you, that they're on board, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I remember walking out of doing my NSCA CSCS exam in 2005 thinking, oh my God, if this is the only thing that I know, I feel completely inadequately prepared to coach anybody. And I'm like, this is like the top cert. And it was good. I'm not knocking the NSCA. It was well done. But if you think that that's the pinnacle of where you're going to be at, it's not.
Yeah, it's an entirely different major, right? Coaching is a different academic major. It's not exercise physiology. So you can understand muscle adaptation, and you should, like Phil said, you got to get the basics down. Like, what are the time frames? What are the magnitudes you can expect? What's realistic? But it's not even, coaching isn't even, that's a whole different major. And that's the risk that you get these kids, they've never even coached. It's like, you think you want to work. Why? I think the question, why do you want to work with the pro athlete? Kind of like what you guys were saying earlier. If it's just to kind of boast that you have a client that's, multimillionaire, you're going to crash and burn, hollow life.
Well, and I don't think under our current education model, I don't think you can just go to school, get a degree, and be a good coach.
No.
Like, yes, there's things you're getting a base foundation, but now you need years in the field.
Yeah.
Like, to learn the actual craft of it. The education gives you the backbone to now start that craft.
Yeah.
But the PhD in coaching comes in the field.
Oh, it does. Dude, I mean, I was a personal trainer in my teens, back before there were a million kinds of certifications and everybody wanted to, do this sort of stuff. And so I got years and years of just trying to figure out what motivated people to stick with it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we had a really simple structure. It was just a sheet of machines, and you took them through one machine to the next kind of thing. But then you started to see, what worked, what not, what clients, got more muscular, which ones lost fat, which ones dropped out. And so, students needed early on, they need to try to network. I'm not saying go take that position necessarily because, I get it. I like that people have to be more qualified in some way, but you've got to start actually observing athlete behavior, right? Mm-hmm. And observing the coach and how she or he does their craft. There's got to be more apprenticeship, right? That's
I feel 100%.
Yeah, that was my big theme for years. Is it's got to be more of a mentorship, apprenticeship, and it can't just be book learning. And then you get your degree or your NSCA certificate or whatever. Oh, I'm qualified. Bring them on.
Yep.
Oh, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is, I don't know if Elite FTS is still doing this. I think they are again, but they used to have the Learn to Train seminars.
Yeah,
that was phenomenal. It scared the living shit out of me to go to that, but I'm like, okay, I'm not big into powerlifting, but if I want to learn the basic lifts on how to get better at them, that's a pretty good place to go. And everyone there was super cool, super nice. It was a interesting experience, but it was super useful to pick away a few things. And then just to also get exposure to all this stuff, you kind of have an appreciation of knowing what you don't know at that point. And being able to, talk to all the specialists in each lift and go through and practice them. And it was over a 2-day thing, and I thought that was actually extremely useful. So some things like that, if people don't have time to do a complete mentorship or internship, there are other places you can still get some practical information still too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, and that's like when people ask me, and the model that I went after was just that. It was an apprenticeship model. Like, I spent 10 years, people ask me, and I spent 10 years in my truck traveling around the world, going to coaches. That's what I did. That's how I wanted to learn this, because I knew they're doing it at the level I want to do it. I'm going there. and I'm going to spend a week there, a month there. Hell, I spend a year at places. It's just, that's the fastest way, in my opinion. And I'd love it if we had some kind of organized model. I don't think it'll ever happen, but you have to take it on your own accord and just reach out to people. The good thing is, and that's what I tell people, 99% of the time, if you reach out to these coaches and you ask if you can just come shadow them, like, they're cool with it.
Right on. And that's true. That's true in sports nutrition and other things too. Just go shadow. You don't have to get a paid internship out of the gate.
No,
you go play a grunt. You're 19 years old and just shadow, even if it's for a few days, because you'll build a network if nothing else.
You will, and you're going to gain tons of experience. But yes, it's going to be on your dime. Like at that point, and it should be. You haven't earned the right to be paid by them. Like if I called Dave 20 years ago and be like, hey, now he'd be, fuck you. But if I called him and said, can I come watch you guys on my dime? Yeah, come on, let's go.
Right, that's right. More often than not, I think a lot of young people would be surprised by that. Like, yeah, you come shadow, you know.
They'd be fine with it, and you're going to learn a ton. So just shut up and listen. But
that's a good topic.
Last quick story on that. A buddy of mine used to run the fitness portion of On It in Austin. So I was asking him about, how do you do internships? Do people come in? And he would joke. He's like, well, we get a lot of people sometimes now that ask for a paid internship for several months. Mm-hmm. And he's like, we don't do that. He's like, if you want to come in and volunteer for a few months and then potentially get a paid position, that's possible. And he's like, and the reason is like, he points over to this guy who was from the UK who was working the smoothie counter. He's like, the reason is you have to compete with him. He moved over to the US. He just showed up here and he's on month 4 now of not getting paid at all and just volunteers and does whatever is needed. Mm-hmm. Like he's trained people, he's scrubbed the floors, he's cleaned the toilets, he's ran the smoothie counter, and he's not getting paid at all. So it's like, you have to outcompete him before we're going to consider you for anything paid.
I think there's a lot of young people, I know we're about out of time here, but they'll be like, well, I'm not a chump. I'm not going to do that. That's for chumps. Yeah. It's like, yeah, but you're going to pick up little things here and there. And like you guys were saying, you don't have the skill set or the experience to be paid. Why do you think you should be paid? Explain to me why I should pay you.
And you're also going to build on that model, you're also going to build what we talked about as the most effective way to market. You're going to build a network and word of mouth.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Like if I went and spent 6 months with Dave and just shut up and learned, he would tell people that if they asked about me later. He was great. He has a passion for the field. He came in, shut up, listened. Yeah, you should go to him. So.
Yeah.
But, all right, guys.
Almost
a good
like
show.
Curmudgeon Hour.
Oh, it was. Right. It was, but that's okay.
Well, it usually is.
The world needs that. We're fighting the rest of the world. Because I guarantee you, for this podcast, there's 14 out there. There's 100 out there telling people that to become a strength coach, this is what you need to do, and it's all focused on social media marketing and bullshit.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So the world needs this voice. So.
All right, guys.
All right, guys. I'll catch you next week.
All right. See you.
Later. Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community. The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers, and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.